All right. Okay, so welcome everybody to The Unsimple Truth. My name is Kelly Lipensky, and we're joined by our seminary intern, Beth Douglas, who is now back in Princeton, New Jersey, and Dave and Marisa Avramovich join us from Pasadena, California. So we're just going to wait a couple minutes before we begin to have Dave and Marisa introduce themselves. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in. We're so grateful for your participation and really spending time with us tonight. We think of these as fireside chats, except you can see our faces, or also we call this your favorite podcast, but live with faces. And it's so grateful and gratifying for me to get to spend time with you all and really connect on what's going on in our country, what's going on in our lives, and how Jesus is really in the middle of all of this, in the beautiful mess and the beautiful chaos, and what it means to pursue Christ, especially right before election night. So we have a lot of you coming on here, which is great to see. So just want to let you all know that this is a webinar for those of you who may be joining for the first time. So you can see all of us panelists, us four, but you won't be able to see any of the audience members. And we will be interacting with each other tonight. This isn't just us talking at you, we want to be talking with you. So I'll really be emphasizing that we want this to be a conversation, not just between the four of us, these four squares. We really want this to be a conversation among all of us here tonight. And so I invite you to do that in two ways. One is, if you look at the bottom of your screen towards your left-hand side, you'll see a little dialog box that says chat. And that is a way that all of the audience, all of you, can talk among yourself as Dave and Marisa are sharing some really interesting stories and anecdotes about their life and wisdom. And if you think they made a really great point, or maybe you're like, oh, that's confusing, or maybe you don't agree, that's fine. You can say that in the chat, say, I'd like more clarity on that, or what do you guys think? Or, wow, I really enjoyed what he just said. I've never thought about hope in that way. That's a time when you get to talk and chat among each other. But then we really want to encourage you to interact in our second way. And if you look in the bottom of your screen again, towards the right-hand side, you'll see two dialog boxes that say Q&A. And if you want to ask any four of us a question directly, and we hope you do, please use that. That is where we ask that you use that, the Q&A box. And that way we will be having a time of Q&A throughout our evening, especially at the end, where Beth and I will be asking those questions directly to Dave and Marisa. So please hop on to the Q&A anytime you'd like to ask us a question directly. Also, we will have a few interactive polls that will be happening in real time throughout our conversation. And just so you know, all polls remain anonymous, so no one can see, including ourselves, how you answer or who answers. So please, we made it anonymous so you can feel brave and courageous to answer as honestly as possible. And in doing so, that really helps all of us get a sense of who you are and what's going on in your life, because we want this conversation to be meaningful and as personal as possible. So with that being said, I just want to thank our guests so much, Dave and Marisa, for being present with us. They are two workers who are working hard and full time, who are doing online school with their daughters, Katie and Ella, and who really set aside this time to be with us tonight. So thank you so much for doing that. Dave and Marisa have been really influential in my life. From 2007 to 2011, I worked with them in Young Life in Los Angeles, California. I was a volunteer leader, and I looked up to them. They were my supervisors and people who really knew youth ministry really well in the Southern California area. And they'll be talking about what they do as they introduce themselves to a bit more. They have decades of experience between them, and they're also husband and wife team, but they offer such a unique perspective to me when it comes to youth ministry. And they'll talk a little bit more about this later on when it comes to their ecumenical marriage. Dave is Presbyterian and Marisa is Catholic, and they bring such a rich, I think, tapestry of wisdom when it comes to how they practice youth min and faith. And Dave is probably laughing at the word tapestry, huh? Yeah. So without any further ado, I just was hoping Beth could introduce herself quickly, and then we'll turn it over to Dave and Marisa.
Yeah, I'm Beth Douglas, the seminary intern for this year. So I'm in my senior year at Princeton Theological Seminary, and I just finished midterm essays, and very much enjoying that. But yeah, I've just been having an amazing time getting to know people at FPC Morristown, doing a Bible study on the Psalms that's been amazing, and just learning from people's insights and experiences, and the way that God's at work in this community has been really awesome. So yeah, I'm just so grateful to get to be here and to be working with Kelly and Stuart, and it's been a really awesome internship.
Thanks, Beth. I've really enjoyed having this space right here and getting to connect virtually, because that's pretty much all it's been, but I do hope we'll get to possibly hear you preach in person soon too. So I would love to turn it over first to Dave. Dave and I met in September 2007. And Dave, I'd love it if you could just tell a bit about where you grew up and how faith has shaped you through the years, and also what you currently are doing right now in Southern California.
Hi, guys. It's fun to be here. Thanks, Kelly, for having us. What a great honor to be invited and be part of what you're doing. What a cool conversation to be having the day before the election, which is tomorrow. So we're going to talk about hope about 26 hours before polls close out here. So pretty nuts. But thanks so much for having us. My name is Dave, and I live in Pasadena with Marisa and our two girls, like Kelly said. I'm on Young Life staff. I've been on Young Life staff since 2007. Kelly was one of the first Young Life leaders that really changed the ministry that we were doing in San Marino, and is a tremendous person and leader and cares deeply about people. And so when she asked us to share, of course, she was so great. So it was such a cool request. We're so thankful to be able to share a little bit. I grew up, I was born overseas in England and then moved to Japan and then to Chicago. And so I really grew up in Chicago for a little bit. And then my parents divorced when I was 4. We lived in a suburb of Chicago, and my dad lived in the city. And then we ended up moving to the Seattle area and growing up there. So I really grew up in a small suburb of Seattle called Gig Harbor, where I went to junior high and high school. And then I went to college in Tacoma, which is just right across the bridge. And it was a great place to grow up. I'm very, very fortunate for the people that were around in Gig Harbor. I had great friends growing up with incredible parents. I didn't have a dad in Washington State, and I had a lot of great friends that I met at school whose parents were incredible in my life, that were putting their arm around me and shepherding me as a kid. And also my grandparents moved into the home with us in Gig Harbor so that my mom, who was a nurse in Chicago, could afford a house in Gig Harbor. And so the 3 of them, my mom, my grandmother, and my grandfather, all lived in the house I had growing up. My grandfather had Parkinson's disease, and so he was fading quite a bit in my childhood. By the time I got to high school, it was pretty serious. But my grandmother and my mother are really the people that helped raise me in a meaningful way. Both of them are beautiful people who knew Jesus. I was lucky to be around them, even though I didn't really embrace that in my youth. But I had incredible people around me that really cared a lot about me. and I always knew that I was loved, even though that was a pretty hard thing to kind of wander into with the loss of my dad in my life. So I really found Jesus, or Jesus found me, or began to walk with Jesus, or whatever theological persuasion you want to start with, in college. And I was a junior in college. My grandfather passed away. And it was a pretty low point in my life. I was playing college football and doing whatever stereotype of college football you can think of. I was doing that, and not really living a very meaningful life. And then my grandfather passed away, and I had a really significant encounter with my grandfather before he passed that changed the trajectory of my life, because he was an incredible man who knew Jesus. And I remember leaving him and going home to my college house and thinking to myself, I want a life of meaning like my grandfather has.
Mhm.
And that was my junior year of college. My senior college was real different than my other years of college in my life up until that point. And then I went to Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, which is how I got to California, Los Angeles. And then I worked in a church. I was a youth pastor for 2.5 years in Glendora, which is right next to where Kelly went to college. And then I was a preaching pastor at Iglesia de la Comunidad in Highland Park, which is kind of in between Pasadena and downtown Los Angeles. And then I came on Young Life staff and became the area director here in Pasadena. And I've been doing that now since 2007, which is kind of amazing. And in 2017, I became the regional director for Young Life in Los Angeles. And it basically just means that I help Young Life staff and leaders do great Young Life in Los Angeles. So that's a little bit, touch on a couple of things. Thanks for having me. And I'm going to pass the baton. Do I pass it to you, Kel, or do you want me to pass it to Marisa?
I just learned a few new things tonight about you. You know, here I've known you for years. I'm like, I did not know some of those wonderful things about your grandfather. I think that's really meaningful. I want to hear more about that later, but I think you should pass the baton to wonderful Marisa. Thanks, Dave.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Marisa, or Marisa. A little bit about me. I really hate talking about myself. I can't imagine doing anything more painful in my life than when I have to introduce myself to strangers. I come from a mixed background. My dad is predominantly German Irish. My mom is predominantly Mexican, but also has some Basque in her heritage. So I claim that as well. My parents met in Hawaii, where my mother was living, and my dad was stationed in the Marine Corps. They met, fell in love, and had me. And they actually just celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in August. So already you might notice some differences in Dave and I's stories, if you're paying attention. I grew up, both my parents come from strong Catholic families, and I grew up raised in the Catholic Church, went through religious education, was confirmed in high school, all the things. And but it really felt very academic, very isolated to mass, or when we were going to a church function. It didn't really manifest itself outside of the church structure, if you will. And that really changed for me in high school. I had the opportunity to serve on Work Crew, which is a service project that you can do through Young Life. My mom was a Young Life kid, and my dad had no idea what Young Life was, but I think I missed this part. They moved to California, Southern California, when I was a baby, and I grew up there. And my mom reconnected with her Young Life leader and was involved with Young Life. She was a leader all while I was growing up, would take kids to summer camp, And my dad would stay home with us and watch us for the week plus while she was gone. So I was very familiar with Young Life, but again, it felt very isolated. But I went and served at a Young Life property as a high school student. And it was during that month that the understanding that I had carried around in my head kind of captured my heart and moved its way into my body. And it was through service that faith became something meaningful in my life. And it changed the trajectory of my life. So that I did work crew before my senior year. At that point, before, I was planning on going as far away from home as possible for college. And something about that experience changed everything about what I wanted from my college experience. And at that time, the only Christian school that I knew nearby was Azusa Pacific University, which is where I had a friend that I was in choir with went there. So I applied there, applied to one school and freaked out my dad. He thought I was not going to get in for some reason, which, he has full confidence in me in lots of other places. But in that moment in my life, he didn't have full confidence that I'd be accepted. I was, and was very grateful for the opportunity to continue in not only my faith journey, but my academic journey through Azusa Pacific. Super challenged being a minority at a predominantly white evangelical institution, being a Latina Catholic. I'm sure you can imagine some of the bumps that I came across on my 4-year journey there. But it really strengthened my resolve actually in my faith tradition, and actually made my resolve to be Catholic and practice my faith through the Catholic tradition even stronger through having to constantly defend why I did things the way that I did them as a Catholic and not an evangelical. So fast forward, I graduated. I ended up serving in the National Civilian Community Corps through AmeriCorps. I went in right after Katrina hit. I was evacuated from when Wilma hit Florida, experienced Rita, worked in the South for a year doing mostly disaster relief. And again, it was through service that again, even deeper my faith went with Jesus, seeing the extremes of poverty within our country. Growing up in Southern California, I just didn't imagine that there were places in our country where there were 6th graders walking around that were unable to read or articulate full or complete sentences. And it struck me that that there's parts of our first world country that are not so first world. And in that, I just continued to feel compelled to serve. And at the time in AmeriCorps, you make $9 a day and you work long days. Sometimes you get a day off in the week. Sometimes you would work 7 days a week. And so I remember knowing that I had an end date for AmeriCorps, but I didn't know what was coming after, and I didn't really have time to figure it out. And so I remember praying one morning as I was making my peanut butter and jelly sandwich that I would take in a sack lunch to our work site, just, Lord, just open a door somewhere, because I don't know where I'm going. And he very clearly opened up an opportunity for me to come on to Young Life staff in my hometown, where I went to high school, and was very grateful for that. Ended up meeting Dave as a result of that door being opened. We met at new staff training in January of 2007. He'd been on staff for 4 days, I think, and I had been on staff for about 6 months. And a year and a half later, we started dating, and now we've just celebrated 10 years this year, and we have 2 beautiful daughters. Currently in Young Life, I'm no longer on field staff, which means I don't work locally in an area, but I work in our training department. I work overseeing our divisions training. Our division is California, Arizona, New Mexico, Hawaii, and I'm forgetting somewhere else in there, but I oversee them. And then I also work locally in Los Angeles. This is my 9th year serving as the regional trainer overseeing training for our region. So that's a little bit about me, and hopefully I didn't go too long, Kelly.
That was brilliant. That was beautiful. No way. That's just what we were waiting for. I think it's interesting in hearing your story, and just that you reiterated the word service a lot in there, and how these opportunities service really acted as kind of this threshold, these service opportunities where you got to engage your faith. It was an embodied faith. It wasn't just philosophizing about, different beliefs or arguing points with classmates. It was practicing it. And how, Dave, you had that profound moment in college where, because of the life of your grandfather and seeing just a life of service, if I could use that phrase, that he really embodied, and you having kind of that moment, that aha moment of, wow, I want to live a life like this man, how much he shaped me. Sounds like, based on the impact he made in your life, he lived a life of service and a life of gratitude and generosity. So I'm just curious in kind of this theme of service and how it connects to hope, because that's our theme of tonight as well. How did service, how did these opportunities where you got to live out your faith, how did that really shape your understanding of Jesus, of the person of Jesus, and the hope you found in Jesus? How did those opportunities, your grandfather Dave, and then those specific opportunities where you really were in difficult places during Hurricane Katrina and disaster relief, Marisa, then how did that environment, where did you find hope in that hard place, or hope in the loss of your grandfather? Or did you?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I think about my life, and I think about all the many people that knew Jesus, that were around me, that modeled a Christ-like posture towards a knucklehead kid that wasn't worth their energy or time. And I think about, I could run down a list of adults, whether it's parents of my friends or young life leaders or youth pastors or friends of mine who have had a profound impact, not to mention my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, in the ways that they carried themselves towards me. And I think what posture they took was they believed things about me that I did not yet realize to be true. And I think that's what hope is, in so many ways, is the ability to pull out light from dark spaces, and to see what could be real and what could be meaningful. And so when these people in my life saw within me reason to invest, to befriend, to encourage and love and support someone that wasn't, frankly, able to love back in meaningful ways, that is the posture of Jesus. And I learned, before I really understood who Jesus was, that was the way that Jesus had called them to live. And so I was fortunate as a young person to be surrounded by incredible people, which is what makes transformation possible. So it's not, this may be too strong, but I feel that when people show up in your life, that's how change happens in your life. It's what's modeled in the incarnation of God coming to earth, God sending his son to earth. And so that's the calling of the body of Christ, is to show up in people's life and to love well. And I was very fortunate to do that. And so they were, call it service, call it sacrifice. They lived that. They lived the elevation of me in the way that they carried themselves and engaged me. And so for me, it's what a gift to have a cloud of witnesses around me saying, here is someone who, if they only knew what God had done for them, then they would be unleashed in a new way to be who God has made them to be. And I think that's the foundation of my understanding of hope, is that people spoke that hope into me and loved that hope out of me And it's the reason why I'm in ministry, is to see that same hope for kids, and all the people that do Young Life in LA, and all the people at my church, and is to see them come to an understanding of what it means to befriend and move towards and become God with flesh in their community and kingdom around them. And it was profound because of the people in my life. It's very real because of that.
You know, when I got to, you know, talk with you guys and reconnect a bit last week, or actually, yeah, it was last week. I'm like, what day is it? That was last week. The days blurring together, working from home, you know, and one thing that you both touched on, and Marisa, I think you used the word incarnational, you know, and how powerful it is that God came into human flesh to show us, like, this is the work. This is the purpose. You know, it's not your business card that's you know, describes your ultimate job or your status in life. This is what it means to be human. Let me show you what it means to be human. And I'm just wondering if, you know, knowing that we have our wonderful youth director watching right now from our church, Dave Favell, another great Dave. And knowing that some of our small groups, I talked to some of our youth leaders who'll be watching this with their small groups later. You know, you talked about, Marisa, having this awesome opportunity after college, and especially being, you know, Latina and Catholic on campus in college, and, you know, just the challenges of that demographic, you know. And I know some of our young people are facing, you know, similar challenges right now as teens and high school students, and feel like they're the outlier. And so talking about being, you know, here Dave's talking about embodying hope, and how powerful that was to have, right, people surround him in his life where he didn't feel like he was deserving of love and support, and didn't know how to give those things, but being able to receive it nonetheless. So what would you say to our young people who are feeling like they're outliers in their communities, or even within their church or worship spaces? What does it mean to, right, to give or to receive hope? How do you do that when you don't feel like you're sometimes given it as much?
It's a good question. Thanks for lobbing that one my way, Kelly.
No
What I think, you know, for me, so much of what I love about Jesus and his life, passion, and resurrection is how, and I think I said this on our call last week, is how countercultural he was as he gave his life away. And I think that's true even in this conversation, right? Like the idea of hope, like if you were to say that in a room, just like a room gathered together, a lot of people associate the word hope with like a wish, or like, you know, this like you know, like you know, like a Disney moment where Tinkerbell is going to fly across the screen with her fairy dust, and, you know, and gift you something, right? But really, when we are talking about hope within the context of Jesus's life, passion, and resurrection, right, we're talking about a fulfillment of a promise. Like we carry within us this gift that we don't have to wish for. And regardless of whether or not we believe it to be true, it exists within us because it was gifted to us in our humanity when God gave us the miracle of life within us. And so hope, for myself, for our younger friends, for our older friends, the hope that we cling to as followers of Jesus is not a wish, but it is carrying that fulfillment of that promise of what Jesus's life, passion, and resurrection accomplished for us. So in that way, we can be certain even when the world is uncertain. We can know that we're headed somewhere that is good because that's what he promises us, a life, a full life that we cannot yet imagine, especially if we use the framework of the world around us to imagine it. And so I think when the structure around us fails us, when the people that are supposed to care for us fail us, being grounded in that hope helps us to move forward. I think that's when in connecting back to my story in terms of service, like that's truly what compelled me to move forward is that hope. It's not a hope in myself. It's a hope of the glory of Jesus, right? Like that's what I'm connected to. That's what compels me to move forward. I have to remind myself daily, hourly, minute by minute of that hope and use that as the structure through which I approach the world, through which I approach other people, because then I can fully recognize the image of God present in them when I remember the image of God present in me. That's the hope that I think is so powerful. That's the radical hope. It's not the fairy dust wish. It's the hope of what we've already been given in Jesus.
It's like, amen. I know it's COVID, but I just want to fly you over here to preach on that. I mean, we need to hear that. We really need to hear that. I haven't thought about it in quite those terms before, to be honest, in terms of, yeah, hope can feel ethereal or like it's just an emotive state all the time. But really, it's about, I love that you said it's about the fulfillment of a promise, and acting and behaving as if the promises, right, of God have been realized in our lives, which is, right, that's the good news, that's the gospel in our life, that the promises of God are being fulfilled and are being fulfilled more and more as time continues, and that we are headed towards, right, deep goodness in the life and presence of God. Which, looking around in 2020, some of us are like, what? How? Where? I don't see it. And we're looking for, right, Tinkerbell to like drop that pixie dust on us, to have that change of experience like that. But it sounds like what you're saying is that hope also needs to be subversive in a ways, regardless of circumstance, that sometimes hope takes a circumstance and says, my external circumstances don't have the final say over my life. My circumstances certainly matter, my context matters, but they don't have the final say in my story and who I get to be and how I get to, right, give love, right, be that conduit of love, be that outpouring of love, because I've received so much love from Christ. I think, man, I need to hear that. I need to hear that, especially before election night. Here we are on the brink of that. And I'm just wondering and Beth, I'd love to hear from you too. Please chime in on this. Just is there a story that you've been returning to recently from scripture, or a parable, or whether, it happened in the Old or New Testament, or, right, you can choose any genre of biblical literature there. But is there a piece of scripture that really is compelling for you when it comes to hope? And what it means to embody this subversive hope. There's so many instances where Jesus chooses to be with, individuals who are really not just in the margins of society, but really disliked by a lot of people in power. And you see a lot of countercultural behavior from Jesus there too.
Do you want us to go or do you want Beth to go?
Dave, take it away. And then Beth, chime in after.
Well, there's lots of stories I think I could talk about. There's specific gospel accounts, and I think there's some thematic ideas about just the evolution of the disciples and their understanding of who Jesus is that are meaningful kind of reminders of what it means to be hopeful, to entrust the ministry of the world to a couple knucklehead teenagers that were mostly fishermen and friends. So there's a lot of hope, in that story alone, that God uses people that are not the most elite of elite to build the church. And so talk about that. One of my favorite gospel stories is in John 9. And I recently shared a little bit about this with some staff out here. But great story is that Jesus is walking on the road and a man born blind from birth is there. And the disciples ask, who caused this man to be born blind? And Jesus' response is that you're asking the wrong question. You're asking for who's to blame instead of what God can do. And that's a challenging response from Jesus, one that pushes me to ask big questions of my own life and my own, the way my brain works. What I love about the story is Jesus doesn't hesitate to go to work on healing the man. The man in the story, the man doesn't say, hey, can you help me see? Jesus just gets to work helping him see. And, for me, when I think about what is hopeful is that Jesus is already at work helping people come to true sight in the world. And for me, at least when I think about, what makes me hopeful is this like sense of what could be is not yet what is. And so for so many people that don't yet see, my hope is that Jesus would help them see, whether they ask for it or not. I think as the story goes on, there's this like great back and forth where people are so skeptical of him, and they're like, well, is this really him? Is this the guy that was really born blind or not? And he's like, yeah, it's me. And then his friends are like, no, it just looks like him. And it gets kind of like all the way up the chain to the like religious leaders, the serious religious leaders of the day. And their response is one of deep skepticism of this man who was born blind that Jesus helped see, to where they get mad at him towards the end of the story because he kind of calls them out for being so curious about who Jesus is. And they throw him in the street, and the message, Eugene says, you're nothing but dirt to us. And then he gets thrown out of the space where they're all at. And my favorite thing about the gospel story is that it says, and Jesus went and looked for him, and Jesus found him. And then he stands in front of him and he says, do you recognize me? And of course, the man who was born blind doesn't recognize much because he never really actually saw Jesus. But then he comes to this realization, he says, the beautiful, my Lord and my God. And he falls down as he realizes that Jesus has the potential to make all things that don't see to see. And for me, I think so much about that, and Jesus's great refrain, in the story, the man says, I don't really know who did this. All I know is I once was blind and now I can see. And that's the real hope of that gospel story for us, is that Jesus is making sight possible, that Jesus is the agent of letting us see what is real and what is not. And Jesus is the one that helps us to see the world the way it's supposed to be seen. Sight is a really powerful metaphor in the scriptures. And I think for all of us to just come to that understanding that God is in the process of making all of us see and see more clearly, metaphorically speaking, is powerful. And so this potential for what could be and what is where hope comes from for me. And so when I encounter people, I just know that if Jesus were to spit and make a paste and rub it on their eyes and they were to do what he said, that they would see the world differently. And then that change, understanding who Jesus is a meaningful one and a hopeful one. And even for my own life, it's a constant. I need Jesus to spit and rub mud in my eyes, although I don't think I'd enjoy that. I think that's the idea, is that Jesus goes to work. Jesus helps us see. And our job is to be on the road next to Jesus where he is in that story. And then the great point at the end, he went out to look for him and found him. That is the gospel. Jesus is constantly looking, and Jesus finds who he's looking for. So it's pretty hopeful.
I love that image. I love that image. It reminds me just what it means, as you were saying, to what does it mean to, embrace Christ in a radical way. And I just think for, right, our teens and our middle school students and our high school students. And when I grew up in a really large public school, and for the first time in its like 70-year history, I was the minority, and we had students in our high school that spoke over 80 different languages, 80, because it was that diverse in South Seattle. There's a lot of refugee resettlement, low socioeconomic poverty in the area that I grew up in. And it was a really changing demographic very suddenly in this area of South Seattle. And so I felt like I kind of, grew up in this little United Nations in a way. I mean, we had people from nearly every country. I mean, we really did. And from all sorts of different religious backgrounds and ethnicities and cultures. And I thought, as I went from elementary to middle school to high school, every school got bigger and doubled in size and got more and more loud and intimidating. And to me, my growing up experience was like, oh, as you get older, the world becomes bigger and more diverse, and you encounter more differences. And therefore, you get just more colors, on the canvas of life, and you just get more narratives, and it's more exciting and it's more beautiful. And I got to see, wow, God really does create in so many incredible ways. And now it's interesting, as an adult, I feel like sometimes my world has become a little more homogenous. And my world sometimes it has gotten more diverse, and the other times it's reverted, and what I see now sometimes within our country and communities is we don't seek sometimes these spaces of multiculturalism. But yeah, I know Marisa's like, mm-mm. And Marisa, you are a regional trainer when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion. And so just, for our teens in Morristown, there is, some, I'd say, what's the big, I don't want to use the word homogeneity. I don't even know if that's an English word. That seems too big and too fancy for what I want to talk about. But, there is some diversity certainly in our area. But also when I think of my high school, I don't see sometimes diversity because we had over 80 different languages, right, at my high school, which is crazy. I can't even name 10 on a good day. So with that being said, how would you recommend, Marisa, like, what does it mean to create spaces of hope for people of all walks of life? How do we do that, knowing that no matter who's elected president, we as Christians, as Christ followers, how important it is to create hope for people of all walks of life? What's just some practical steps we can take to do that?
I feel like you're just picking on me tonight, Kelly, asking me the hard question.
You got it.
Yeah, I do some work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a certified cultural intelligence trainer through the Cultural Intelligence Center in Michigan. But I would say a couple things. One is, even if you feel a sense of, I don't know what you called it, but I'm going to say a homogenous sense around you.
Thank you. That makes a lot more sense what you said.
But when you feel that around you, I think that sometimes is a false sense of security, because really diversity like sometimes gets, whittled down to skin color or, race, ethnicity, which race is, I mean, it's a social construct. We could spend a whole hour just talking about that. But I think, where is the diversity around you that you are not seeing, in terms of ability? It's such an overseen element of diversity within the kingdom of God is the varying levels of ability around us. And if we're going to say that, God created all these things, we have to include then our brothers and sisters who have diverse abilities. Another element, socioeconomic diversity exists around us. And sometimes you wouldn't know it because we make policies based on one section of that diverse group. So I think the first thing that I would say is, to what extent are you allowing yourself to see the diversity that exists around you? So a couple ways you can do that. One is open your eyes and pay attention, right? Like just look and see, and look to see what you might be missing. I think one of the greatest gifts that Jesus gave us was the advocate, the Holy Spirit. Even just centering yourself for a couple of minutes and listening. What do you notice? What do you hear around you that makes you wonder, what do you see that you don't normally see? Like, what might the Spirit be compelling in you to take notice of with your eyes? Another way that you can do that is through paying attention to who you are listening to, who are you sanctioning in your life, and who are you not questioning, is really a way to say that. I heard a version of that from Dr. Christina Edmondson last week on something that we did with Young Life. It was a very compelling thought, because oftentimes we're looking for things that we disagree with to question and to challenge, but what do we agree with that we've never thought about why we agree with it, right? So one of the ways that you can do that for our younger friends is paying attention to the feeds that you follow. Does everybody that you follow on your Instagram or TikTok look like you? If that's the case, that would be a good place to start, is paying attention to the voices that you are giving value to by following them. Another place that you can look is, where is the literature that you're learning from coming from? Is it a homogenous authorship that you're reading? Do you have diverse voices represented in the authors that you follow? even and this is really important, is even when you're just articles, who are the authors of those articles? What are the news organizations that you're following? Do you follow only people that will affirm your convictions? Do you follow people that will challenge your convictions, that will make you, again, recognize some of the things, the implicit biases that we have? And then lastly, I would say, because I could keep going, but I'll leave with this last suggestion. Another way of recognizing and acknowledging our implicit biases is looking at the people that we most closely trust. So if you look at that group, and if you were to write their names down on a sheet of paper, and you were to start looking at gender, age, ability, education, socioeconomic status, would you see a representation of diversity amongst the people that are the closest to you? Or would you find a homogenous group? That's like a really easy way of just checking what are the biases that we're carrying because of who we are most closely associating with. It's so valuable to spend time as believers with non-believers. I'm in a book club, and that's one of my favorite things about it, is the common denominators are that we're all women and that we're all mothers. There's no other common denominators. There's working moms, there's stay-at-home moms, there's believers, there's non-believers, there's ethnic diversity, there's political diversity, and the conversations that we have are so robust because of the differences that we share. It's sometimes a false sense of security to look just for affirmation. Where are you looking to be challenged?
That is rich. That's so good. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Beth to ask a few questions, and just wanted to thank you, Marisa, for just those wonderful practical suggestions, and want to let everyone know we put them in the chat box for our teens, for our adults, for our parents, just some of those suggestions. And I thought it was so practical. One last thing is thank you for those who participated in the poll. The question you answered was, when was the last time you experienced a profound sense of hope? And the majority of you said it was within the last 24 hours or within the last week. So that's encouraging to hear, considering we're in a season of a lot of tension and a lot of differences, as Marisa talked about. And as Beth takes it away with a couple more questions before we wrap it up by 8 o'clock, I'm going to share our last poll with you all, our last question, and launch that. So thanks, Beth. Take it away.
Sweet. Well, yeah, Marisa, thank you so much just for those tips. They're so practical and relevant. I feel like, I know for me in work or different situations, I'll just feel like I just haven't had practical experience. I haven't had training, and just kind of like wishing that there would just kind of be like a rule book to read, and then realizing, like there's not always just information that's going to be handed to me, but what does it look like to go out and live in community and to learn from brothers and sisters in Christ, and to learn more about their lives and their experiences. And yeah, like you're talking about friendships, community, learning from the people that you read and listen to, and just all of the voices that you surround yourself with, and just getting to learn from other people, I think is so powerful and important. And I know for me that journey has been such a big part of my Christian discipleship and Christian formation, and just the Holy Spirit challenging me and strengthening me. But it's been such a place where I felt God's strength in my weakness, because I will mess up and take a long time to learn, and it will just kind of be, it's not easy, but a life of discipleship and following God isn't easy. And I've just been so encouraged by the way I've felt the Holy Spirit really practically showing up for me and providing encouragement, and just helping me to see God's heart for our world, and like to better see people as God sees them. So just, yeah, thank you for all the work that you do, because it's so powerful. And I think, in my experience, just has been so deeply a part of my Christian faith, and has helped me grow and experience the Holy Spirit and experience God in such incredible ways. So yeah, gosh, thank you. I think for, questions, one thing in particular I'd really love to hear from both of you is just a time when you've experienced a profound sense of hope, particularly during childhood. Is there any moment or memory that stands out that really embodies hope, or that taught you something new about hope through that experience?
I mean, I can try to do that. I think there's such a big part. I think locations have a lot of baggage. And when we moved to Washington State, I left Chicago, and I think that was really hard. But I think the drive, we went from Chicago I-90 all the way to Seattle, and we're in a van, and we're stopping at Super 8 motels, single mom with two wily kids going across the country. And I think it was such a weird adventure. I still remember my sister read the whole time, and I don't know what I did, because I hated reading at that age. But just this movement out to Washington State, and what it could be. I mean, it felt like, I don't know, it felt like I was going to a different planet, and it was full of potential of what it could be. And my great and grandpa were going to live there, and my cousins are there, and it just could be. And I remember when we got there, we found the house, we went into the house. I just remember the living room, feeling like the living room was large, and throwing a football to myself and catching it. And just this feeling of, this is a new space where I can get away from what was not fun and was really challenging as a kid. And so that I think of that. I just go, what a simple kind of Ebenezer moment, like cross-country drive, not all the way across the country, but felt like most of the country. And kudos to my mom for doing it with two kids, and letting me throw a football to myself in the living room. So that's probably the story I would tell.
She was a courageous woman. Yeah. That's to do that across country. Wow. Yeah. Pre-smartphones too, right? Gosh.
Yeah, what did we do? What did we do before technology? That's I don't know. I've been racking my brain for like a succinct way to answer that question. But I think I'll offer this. I think that I think I experienced hope through the generational, like, passing down of faith in both my grandparents, like both sets of grandparents, in particular my grandmothers, who both were fervent prayer women of prayer. And I think I did not yet understand what it meant to hope in something beyond, like, I hope Santa Claus brings me this toy that I want, right? That kind of, that connection to what I said earlier in terms of like that hope being like this wish, like granting. Um, but I think, for me, seeing and experiencing the hope of my grandmothers and the connection that they had to their faith, and the prayers that they prayed daily for their large families. My dad's one of 5, my mom is one of 10. That was a lot of people to pray for. But I think the hope that they found in those prayers and connection to the Lord, and really that sense of acknowledgement that that they didn't have, that's all they could do. That's the best they could do for their families. They couldn't necessarily provide in a lavish way, but they could pray, and they could put their families kind of before the Lord and offer them back. Um, so yeah.
That was a great question, Beth. Yeah. And Marisa, I thank you for sharing that. That's a profound act of trust to just, right, to give your loved ones, to give your opportunities to really give that fully to God is something that I'm constantly working through as well. Not just, when it comes to, of course, praying for the church that I'm a part of, the First Presbyterian Church, but in my own life too, these things I really want to hold on to or have more control over, and what it means to, right? I think about like the idea of being a little drop of water and falling into the river of God's will, but really it's like we're all traveling into the ocean of God's love. It's like everything that I may be hoping for, I want my dreams to be aligned with God's, because that is where true joy and much deeper fulfillment and a sense of purpose and belonging really lie. And what you said about, man, your family praying for your mom being one of 10, that's really powerful, that image. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We had a great group of people watching at home. And just wanted to give you the last results of our final poll question. And we asked, what area of life makes it difficult for you to experience hope? And we had 7 or 8 different options you could choose from, like career or work, relationships with family or friends, right? Emotional, mental, or spiritual health, a death or significant loss. But the one that people said makes it most difficult to experience hope, 62% said it's politics or public life. And Jesus was absolutely in the midst of, right, his historical context, in the midst of political and public life, as Marisa and Dave were talking about. Truly, when it came to being a deep incarnational, embodied, right, source of hope. And I think that's a great question to end with. How are we being a great incarnational sense of hope for our neighbors, those that don't look like us, that may not even speak the same language as us, those who may have different beliefs, but to be like Christ, which is the ultimate goal of anyone who wants to follow Christ, to be a disciple of Christ. It means to provide hope for all we encounter. And that is a challenge for me as well. And I think really a really inspirational thing to think on and chew on some more. So I want to give the last word to our wonderful guests, and thank you all for joining us again. And I just wanted Dave to have a couple minutes just to end our evening here, because we want to honor your time, and to share a bit about Young Life and just the incredible ministry that it is for our young people especially.
Well, I mean, I would just go back to what Marisa said, which is if you believe in the image of God in kids that don't go to church, then Young Life is one of the best tools in the world for reaching kids that don't know Jesus yet. And I don't want you to jump on the team in Los Angeles because you don't live anywhere near Los Angeles, but I do want you, if you are moved with compassion, like Jesus is when he sees the crowds, if you are moved with compassion to care about kids that don't go to church and don't know Jesus and don't have any interest in that and really honestly don't like church and Christians, then Young Life might be the right spot for you to get involved. So I would just tell you, libertyregion.younglife.org is the local regional website. Casey Dunn is my counterpart in Philadelphia, and he is an incredible man. He's been on staff what feels like forever, but he is about the right things, about getting kids into real relationships, incarnation, and being a person of hope, cares about these kids. So they need lots of help, and they need incredible people. If you're one of those people that's passionate about that, I don't know if you can find a better place than Young Life. So please get involved and do some kind of ministry. Christians need to do stuff, not consume. So get out there and do stuff, whether it's Young Life or help out at a local shelter or a school or tutor or something. The world is desperately looking for Christians that will do stuff, that their actions match what they say. So Young Life might be a place for that. There's lots of other places you could do that, but just go do stuff. Do stuff the way Jesus does it. Love people, see the image of God in others, and give your life away. That's what God's called us to. So anyway, thanks so much. Sorry to plug Young Life. I just really believe in what Casey's doing in all of Philadelphia, and really think kids are desperate for conversations with adults. The average kid has 2 minutes of meaningful interaction with adults, and that includes parents. So get out there and love kids. They desperately need. If you see a kid at church, freak out. Love them, get to know their name, hear their story. Kids desperately need adults in their lives. Sorry, that was a little bit longer than I thought, Gil.
I love it.
Sorry.
Freak out the kids you see, scare them a little bit with your love. I think that's Young Life has totally changed the trajectory of my life. I was a Young Life kid, and because I was a Young Life student, I decided to go to a Christian college. And because I went to a Christian college, I encountered Dave and Marisa. And really being a Young Life volunteer leader was the best thing that happened to me in college, more than any paper degree I got or any, above C grade I got, because I scraped by sometimes. This is now on an archived footage, but it was seriously so profound to me to get to not just talk about faith, but live it out. And that was really the most valuable thing I received from college, was that. And it's still changing my life to this day. And I constantly quote that, right, 90% of ministry is showing up, doing stuff, right, giving your life away. And Dave and Marisa taught me that, and I've never forgotten it. So thank you so much for living it out. It's for walking what you talk. It's such a gift. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And if you want to share this series, our November series, with any of your friends or family members, or with your small group as well, you can do that. It will be on our website soon, and you can share that link. Thank you so much, and good night, and much love from First Pres Church.